Senator McConnell, welcome back to the show. Good to have you. If you could just give us an update on the flooding situation in your state, what's the latest and how can people help?
Well, Guy, it's the worst we've ever had. It's been a tough year in Kentucky. We had tornadoes in western Kentucky back in December, and now this. There are 4 or 5 counties in the heart of Appalachia where we have upwards of 30 or more people killed. We're still finding bodies, and it's been really an unmitigated disaster. I talked to some of the old-timers down there on the phone, and they can remember a flood back in the 50s, and this was worse than that. So there are places where people can make charitable contributions if they'd like to, and thank you for asking. We'll get past this, but it's been a horrendous problem.
Absolutely. And people can Google for various causes they can contribute to. Perhaps the Red Cross is usually very good on this type of thing, the American Red Cross. Senator, we just spent the first hour looking back at last night, these races across the country. 2 of particular interest, I would imagine, to you, perhaps 3. The Senate primaries in Arizona, Missouri, and also out in Washington State. What do you think of the Republican slate of nominees that emerged? Blake Masters in Arizona, Eric Schmidt in Missouri, and Tiffany Smiley out in Washington. What's your general assessment of those 3 candidates that your party's going to go into battle with in November?
Well, I think the outcome in Missouri was particularly important. One of the candidates competing had major flaws, and that the candidate was not successful. Attorney General Eric Schmidt, who did win the nomination, to me looks like a first-class electable nominee. Tiffany Smiley in Washington State is outstanding, probably doing the best job of any non-incumbent Republican candidate in the country of raising money and making a good first impression. And with regard to Arizona, it wasn't close in the Senate race. Mark Kelly is the incumbent, has raised a ton of money. He's very competitive, and I think we're going to have a close a big fight and a close outcome in the Arizona Senate race.
I want to talk about another big story on Capitol Hill this week, the surprise announcement, I guess this was late last week at this point, Joe Manchin and Chuck Schumer, that they had this agreement, not just an agreement, but a whole bill that they'd written, which is Build Back Better Light, or BBB 2.0, whatever you want to call it. A lot of tax increases, a lot of new spending. First question, it seemed like it caught a lot of people off guard, including a number of Democrats like Kyrsten Sinema. You on the Republican side had just helped pass the CHIPS Act, which you had sort of drawn some lines in the sand about. That moment passed, maybe some of your leverage was then gone, and it wasn't subtle. A few hours later, they spring this surprise announcement on you. Were you shocked by that? Do you feel, a lot of people give you credit, and I think it's deserved, being a really sharp tactician. Did you feel like maybe Manchin and Schumer got the better of you, maybe rolled you on this one?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because they could do this bill if they got their act together, wholly aside from what we do. We have no ability whatsoever to thwart a reconciliation bill. If the Democrats get their act together, they can pass it. What was surprising was that Joe Manchin basically went back on everything he'd been saying publicly about what he would not do. They stuck this phony label on this Manchin deal, calling it an inflation bill. It doesn't do that. It has zero impact on inflation long term, and actually increases inflation over the next 2 years. He insisted that it reduced the deficit, and we just got a CBO score saying it actually increases the deficit over the next 5 years. This bill was unrelated to the CHIPS bill. This is a bill they could always have passed at any time if they had gotten their act together, and the key to getting their act together was to get Manchin back on board, and he ended up signing off on a bill that basically goes against almost everything he had said both publicly and to us on the floor of the Senate. $300,000 plus billion new taxes on American jobs, particularly falling hard on American manufacturers, a catalog of tax hikes and green boondoggles Democrats have wanted for years. They just stuck a new name on. And listen to this, 80,000 new IRS agents to go after middle-class families and small businesses. No, the surprise was, completely unrelated to the CHIPS bill, the surprise was that Manchin would basically reverse his position on so many different things and agree to this kind of deal.
Now, Manchin has given a few interviews, including on our network at Fox, saying that it's just not true. It's a lie. What Republicans, including you specifically, are saying that there are new taxes or tax increases in the bill. I don't understand where he's coming up with that, because you just look at the bill. Of course there are tax increases in there on manufacturers and businesses, but he's trying to say this has nothing to do with taxes, not one penny of new taxes. Do you have any clue what he means by that, or what he's trying to convey with that?
What he's doing, Guy, he's saying no new tax rate increases. That's true. But what they have done is shift the burden to people who actually pay the taxes by eliminating some of the legitimate preferences, particularly that manufacturers have. So the question is, where does the tax burden go? It's playing with language. The fact of the matter is the tax burden will add $300 billion of new tax burdens. In other words, people who actually pay it on American jobs. Do you follow me?
I totally agree. Yeah, the rates don't change. That's true. The rates don't change, but that's not the only definition of a tax increase. If you're raising taxes on businesses, which is what they're doing unequivocally, that is a tax increase. And when you're counting on new revenue from that tax increase, that's a tax increase. I mean, you're being, I think, very generous calling it playing games with words. I think he's sort of engaged in some misinformation, because he's not saying there are no tax rate increases. He's saying there are no tax increases at all, which is just demonstrably false, on top of all the other issues that you've raised on the deficit, on inflation, even though they call it, the Inflation Reduction Act. That is quite a turn of flipping the true meaning of language around on its head, as they're trying to do with the word recession right now over at the White House. Does this whole deal that Manchin made with Schumer, does it change your opinion of Joe Manchin at all?
Well, he's certainly not been shall I say, consistent, not even recently consistent, because this deal that he cut with Schumer steps on virtually everything he said, both publicly and privately, as recently as within the last couple of weeks. So it's stunning to watch him try to explain all these reversals of positions in such a short period of time. Joe in the end got there on the $1.9 trillion so-called rescue package last year that created 40-year inflation. And now that we are by definition in the middle of a recession, they want to raise taxes. That's the one thing you don't do in the middle of a recession.
Which is something he said in the past. You should never do it. Now he's doing it. He also finally admits that the rescue plan was a mistake. He said at the time it would not increase inflation. Of course it did, but he's saying we're not going to make the same mistake this time. I guess that remains to be seen. Last point on this bill and this deal, this package. I asked you if you think that you got rolled by the Democrats. Let me turn that around a little bit. Do you think that Manchin is going to get rolled by Democratic leadership, because some of the major concessions that he said that he won on permitting reform, on pipelines, pro-fossil fuel stuff, he's very excited about those things, but they're not actually in this bill. They would have to come in a later bill, and the Democrat leadership, they're telling him, don't worry, we're going to make it happen, we're going to attach it to must-pass stuff. But once that leverage is gone and they've gotten his vote for what all the progressives want, do you think there's a chance that the concessions that they're promising him suddenly evaporate?
Yeah, I think it's overwhelming likelihood. Look, there's no way we could get rolled on a reconciliation bill. A reconciliation bill doesn't have any Republican support to begin with.
Right.
The way they do this is to finally get their act together, and the reason they were able to get their act together is Manchin basically publicly reversed everything he's been saying, both publicly and privately, the last 2 weeks. So this is not a question of snookering Republicans. Republicans aren't going to vote for this anyway. This is a question of whether or not they can get their act together. And Manchin basically shifted position on so many different things to cut this deal, and that presumably is how they will end up passing this with this 50-50 vote with Kamala Harris in the chair.
There was a vote in the House recently, last month, on same-sex marriage. I thought it was an interesting bill, the way it was written. Full disclosure, I support it. There's one tweak to the language I think would be reasonable, and we've talked to a number of members on this show about that. But there were questions about whether there would be enough Republicans to get to 60 votes to help the Democrats pass this same-sex marriage bill, get to 60. The rumors were, the reports were that there might be 10 or more Republicans. There's a couple who are on the record against it, others who are on the record in favor of it, others who aren't quite sure yet. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think that that bill should come up for a vote? If it does, would you vote yes? Would you vote no? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I can only speak for myself. I've not made a decision on it yet, and if we, in fact, have the vote, I'll announce my decision at that particular time.
Okay. You also led a letter this week, 26 Senate Republicans, doing something that you don't really do very often in public, which is to full-throatedly defend House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And it's like, okay, wow, where's this coming from? It was about her trip to Taiwan, where it seemed like the White House was pressuring her not to go. Of course, the Chinese communists were saber-rattling like crazy. Just give us quickly, Senator, less than a minute, your thoughts on Speaker Pelosi's trip and why you wanted to put that in writing, supporting that move of her journey over there.
Yeah, I think she did the right thing. Not something I would routinely be saying about the Speaker. I think she did the right thing. I don't think the Chinese ought to be able to dictate who visits Taiwan, and I'm glad she went. I think it was important for her to do it, and that's another way we push back against Xi. The other way is to beat the Russians in Ukraine, because the Prime Minister of Japan said, if you want to send Xi a message, this Prime Minister of Japan said, if you want to send Xi a message, beat Putin in Ukraine.
Mitch McConnell of Kentucky is the Senate Republican leader. Senator, we always appreciate your time here. Thank you very much for making some time for us.
Thanks, Guy.